Right, good evening everyone, and welcome to the Tuesday 28th of June 2022 meeting of the Children Education and Communities Policy and Scrutiny Committee. Busy agenda tonight, the main item being that of the Ofsted report and response to. But I'm going to start with declarations of interest first of all. Do any of the members have any declarations of interest to make? Well, thank you very much. The next item, number 2, is the minutes of meetings held on the 13th of April 2022 and the 3rd of May 2022. Any revisions to make, please? Can I have a proposer for the minutes in that case? Thank you very much. Can someone second them? Just be. Oh, well, true. Yeah. Thank you, Fiona. Right. In that case, we'll move on to item 4, which is the Children's Services Ofsted report. And so I'll start with you, Jamila, to present your report to us. And then we'll move on to Neil when you feel that's helpful. Okay. And to Councillor Waller too. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So I will make a start on the report. So hello everyone. So I'm just going to go through the report. I'm not going through the report in its entirety, but just to pull out key points for consideration. So as we know, York Council was inspected between the 7th and 18th of March this year. We had an ILACS inspection, which was an inspection of our children's social care services and mainly focused on what we call looked after children, so our corporate parent responsibilities. They also looked at our front door, our MASH, as well as our children in need. So it's very different framework that came out in 2016. So we were last inspected in 2016 under the single inspection framework. That was a much wider framework that looked at sort of more partner engagement and more schools. The framework that has come out now, the ILACS, which is a much smaller and more pointed to children's services and how we as a council are delivering care to our young people across the city. We did have a couple of areas following the inspection, which they stated that we needed requires improvement on. So if we look at point 9, there are specific 3 areas that they look at in an ILACS, and that was the impact of leaders on social work practice and children and families, the experience and progress of children who need help and protection, and the experience and progress of children in care and care leavers. So a lot of the inspection was around our children in care and care leavers. That's where quite a bit of focus was. There's some focus on safeguarding. And what the inspectors found that we required improvement to be good. So there was an element of where we are on that journey to be good, but we hadn't actually got to that point yet because there was lots of things that we still needed to do. The inspectors did recognise that we have been on a journey. So we had a joint, what's called a JTI, a joint inspection. That was an inspection together with our partners in 2019. And we had a peer review in 2018. So following that, we have got a whole improvement plan. And whilst we've been on that journey, as we can recognise, we had COVID through 2020 and 21, and that sort of slowed things down, especially with our partners as COVID took a lot of the health services were stepped down. So the response to COVID, an acute health response could be galvanised. I think one of the things that we need to ensure and remember here is that the Ofsted inspectors found that through COVID, we had supported our social workers well. So social workers felt that they had the right support, although people weren't in the office, they had to make those particular decisions. And equally, they found that no, we didn't have unsafe services, so they had no concerns around safeguarding and were our children safe. They felt that they were. However, there was evidence around consistency of practice. They found some really good practice in some teams. They found some poorer practice in other teams. And they said, well, if you've got inconsistency in your practice, then that could be inconsistencies in the support that a young person gets, depending on which team they landed in. They also felt that some of our decision making was delayed, and we could be a bit more decisive in some of the decisions that we support children and families to be made. And this was where they felt that some of our supervision maybe needed to be more robust, maybe more framework in place. We were on that journey, both on the journey of bringing in consistent practice standards. So what's that practice standards across all teams? And that was around consistency. And we were on that journey around what does our supervision framework look like? How do we get consistency in supervision and timely decision making? So we were already on that journey, but inspectors felt that we hadn't actually completed and made enough progress in that by the time they came to inspect. Another area that they looked at was the leadership. They looked at how leaders were aware of some of the areas that needed to be changed, updated, and brought forward at a pace, and some of the following from the JTI and how we had progressed those through the improvement plan. There is an improvement board in place. There's an ambition board that's in place that is chaired by our Chief Officer, Ian, and also attended through our elected member. So those all things are in place. So what they were saying is that the leadership was there. However, we needed to push things much more forward at a quicker pace. And I do have to, and I think people say, oh, well, COVID shouldn't have had that much impact, but it had an impact where the partnership element delayed some of the work that we wanted to do as we felt that we've come out of COVID. And you can see the action plan that we've attached to this. You can see some of the dates of improvement are really in the next 4 to 8 weeks. And that's because we can now really speed it up what we've actually put in an improvement plan. So we're not starting from, the inspectors have found lots of things that we didn't know. What we found that we were on that journey, and we're now coming to the end of one part of the journey and then moving to a consistent, good social work and social care service. So that's where we are at the moment. We have shared the Ofsted action plan with our lead inspector, who has endorsed it. Give us a few minor comments that we need to change, because obviously this is an action plan that has to be signed off by Ofsted, and whether they think that we've understood the inspection and the key elements that they've raised. And as you can see from the action plan, there are 7 key elements in there that they wanted us to have a look at. One of the areas that they really wanted us to focus on was the children's voice. We have made some changes in the corporate parenting board to make sure that children and young people are really part of that. But equally, we are working with our children and young people to change some of the care planning to say, if the care plan doesn't enable children and young people's voices to be heard, how can we do that differently, and how can we do that with children? And that work has started. So you can see in the action plan, we're looking by August that care plan will be amended, and children will be really part of how would they like us to assess and support them through that, because that's the whole assessment is for the young person. The action plan needs to be signed off by Ofsted by the 12th of August. So hence the deadlines and the governance structures that it's got to go through. But just want to say that the action plan will be owned by Ofsted and ourselves. And then Ofsted will look at how they will then seek assurances from us. Usually they come twice a year, or they can come more if they feel that they have concerns. What I can say in our action plan, there's nothing there that we weren't working on at the moment. There's nothing there that we haven't got and it wasn't in our improvement plan. But we do want to work at a place because as everyone, every day we miss is a day lost in a child's life. So hence why you can see in the action plan, we haven't wasted any time. I'm saying we need that consistency of practice. Those practice standards have been completed and sent to teams. The supervision template will be completed, and the voice of the child is we're working with the children. So we haven't waited to complete an Ofsted plan. what we have done is built on that and improved the pace of the improvement plan. So I'm just going to pause there. I don't know if Councillor Waller wants to come in or Neil wants to come in if I've missed some key bits.
No, I won't delay us very much further. Really, the only things I did want to particularly highlight really would be, and this is in no way to diminish the actual outcome of the inspection and the finding of the inspection, but I think it's important as well, particularly for our staff that have been on an improvement journey, is to recognise the areas of progress and strength that were identified by Ofsted, in particular around the multi-agency safeguarding hub, around the targeted family support service. So actually, I think we do need to actually make sure that we pause and recognise that it's right that we focus on the areas of development and we focus on the actions required to take that forward. But we know that actually those developments have taken place over the last few years, and actually that staff have put in enormous effort into ensuring that they're delivering those aspects to a high standard for children. As Jamila said, consistency is a real key word throughout all of this, and I'm sure that will come out in the ensuing sort of conversation that we will have. And the last thing I'll just add is, in terms of the action plan, there is a bit of a structure to it, really. So yes, there are some quick actions that we can and we should be taking off the back of the recommendations from Ofsted, but key will be about the embedding of that into practice and seeing the quality of the difference in that. And at previous scrutinies, we've talked about the improvement journey moving from a compliance focus to a quality focus. And I think that's part of what is borne out through the inspection, is shifting that focus really into making sure that the quality of practice and outcome is embedded in what we're doing. And that's what's reflected in the draft action plan, is how we make some of those changes, and through a programme of action learning sets, quality assurance, external review, we are assured and are making the progress that we need to make. So those are the only bits I'd add at this point.
Thank you, Neil. Councillor Waller, do you have any comments to make?
Thank you. I'd like to thank staff for their explanation of many of the things contained within this, which has been helpful for me as executive member to challenge how do we see the outcomes of things that are being discussed. And therefore I think it's important that lots of pairs of eyes get to see this report, whether as councillors, executive members, young people, that this is a plan which sets out a series of actions. And as Jamila and Neil explained, there are many deadlines within the next few weeks. And it's driving that at pace, but in a way that acknowledges capacity. But what's important is that we are all able to see the improvements and the outcomes, and that's an important feature of the continued tracking. I'm glad that Neil mentioned that it really is worth recognising the good practice that was recognised in the inspection. Quite rightly, we are focused on the 7 points for requires improvement to be good, but there are many features that it is important to recognise that a team that we are asking to do more and to implement these changes, that we recognise those things that have worked well. So I think it's important that whilst there is the deadline of the 12th of August, which is non-negotiable with Ofsted, that is something that we have no choice over. But I think by having tonight's meeting and subsequent meetings, that there's the opportunity to fully air issues that people want to raise. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Waller. If I might start the questions to the three of you, and I suspect Jamila will be the person to answer most of them. I was going to say that the reading the report, the draft action plan, it's quite noticeable that a lot of progress has been made. In many places it says this is currently underway. You clearly have made a lot of progress. We are aware of this as a committee. We were told by your predecessor, Jamila, that improvement plan was in place, much good work was going on and so on. Are you confident you can hit the timescale and the points that Councillor Wallace just mentioned to us with Ofsted?
Absolutely. Otherwise, we wouldn't have put those targets in. So we know from our improvement plan and from the work that we're doing and is ongoing, those are quite achievable targets. As I mentioned, whilst I was going through the report, things like our practice standards, we've already done those and we've shared them across teams as of this week. And it's about maintaining, as Neil said, that consistency and making sure that everybody knows what is expected and what good looks like, and that then through supervision, making sure that's consistent. Similarly, with the supervision framework, we're expecting that to be completed by the end of this week with our social work colleagues, and then for that to be delivered. And Neil's already doing a whole raft of work with the children's voice and ensuring that the care plans are changed. And that care plan work has been underway for the last sort of 5 or 6 months. So the targets that we've put in here are very realistic. We equally didn't want to have targets that were later on in the year, because we want changes now for our children and making sure that we achieve them. So there's nothing here, Chair, that I think is not achievable within the targets we set.
Okay, thank you very much. Can I open the, I think I saw Councillor Webb first of all. Councillor Webb.
Thank you, Chair. Let's be honest, this is really disappointing for York. It's a real worry for the children in our care. And I think it is really concerning for a number of reasons. I would start by sort of echoing what Neil said about MASH, about early help. I think there are some positives in there, and I think I'd agree. I'd like to thank staff for the work that they put in and the tireless efforts they put in. I'd also like to come directly to Jamila and say that I think you're in a very difficult position here. I mean, let's be clear, there has been a constant churn in the leadership of this area of the council for a number of years now. About 2 years ago, there was a formation of a director of people, which at the time I remember saying, does this mean this might take eyes away from children's? That was a concern. A year later, that post was sort of broken apart again, as the person who was in that position left the council and the position couldn't be filled. An interim person came in to look after sort of children's services, and they led us through the Ofsted, and then they themselves now left. Jamila, you have been holding on to this one, so thank you for that. But it's worth mentioning that from a management point of view, there has been a real problem with leadership, as is highlighted in the report. In terms of political leadership, I mean, the report identifies that senior leaders and elected members are well informed and clearly cited on where improvements are needed. But since 2016, that's not happened. It's gone the other way. The executive member who was responsible for children in the city was sacked recently, and Councillor Waller, we welcome you as a replacement. I mean, tonight, my question now is about the administration. I mean, our colleague, Councillor Baker, who represents the Green part of the administration, hasn't turned up. Councillor Waller, do you accept that your administration was not taking children seriously in our city? And do you think that your administration will now take children's services seriously? And how are we going to see that change?
Councillor Webb, I don't believe that children were not taken seriously by my predecessor. I think that this plan does draw together many actions that were already being undertaken. The question was about pace. There was investment put in the last budget, so I respect the political challenge. I would expect that from the Labour group, but I think the priority has to be to deliver quality services for children. And I think this is a strong plan to deliver that.
Thank you, Councillor Waller. Thank you, Councillor Webb. Councillor Fitzpatrick.
Thank you. Looking at number 6 on page 12, I'm very pleased that the new inspection framework is in fact focusing far more on the experience and outcomes for children. That's absolutely right, that it should be that way. So that is good. I would look again at 23 on page 18. Final challenge and assurance will take place through the executive and our committee here as required. I'm amazed that it says as required. Of course it will be required. It will be required every step of the way. We are going to have very, very regular updates and know what's happening. And I think evidence will show over the last few years, as Councillor Webb has alluded to, that this committee has asked all the right questions and put all the right challenges in, and none of the things that were found to be amiss, if you like, were things that we hadn't already asked questions about. So we are aware of that. I noticed that the Assurance and Ambition Board, it's quite clear, it's 3 people there. I mean, I was part of the interview process for the DCS, so I know that we've got somebody coming in who is going to be experienced in doing that alongside Councillor Waller. But it's going to be no mean task. So given that there's no opposition member at all on that board, it will mean that we'll absolutely have to have regular updates through this committee. And to come to a question really on just one of the points on page 26 to Neil really. Yes, I've been part of the parent corporating board and I fully agree with all the steps that have been made, although it was a bit muddled in part sometimes about who was going to stay on there, who wasn't in terms of elected members, but absolutely right that it should be more about young people. When are we going to see this initial training and briefings rolled out in July 2022? Is that happening? Because that will have to be in the next few weeks, really. I recognise that most of it will be rolled out after the local elections next year. That's the training for elected members that needs to happen. Can you just say a bit about that, please?
Yeah, so this is in relation to children and people's voice and sharing awareness about the responsibilities of corporate parenting. So the last corporate parenting board, we agreed that we wanted to do some initial work, which would be in the form of a video briefing, which we would share with all elected members about their responsibilities towards corporate parenting. That's currently being produced with children and young people and with our communications team. I'm getting an update on that again this week. So we're still working on that to be available in July. We then also are looking to deliver face-to-face training as part of elected member induction. And that's the slightly longer term piece where that training is actually delivered by young people. So that work is also in train. So we are working to the timeframes that are set out. So just to give you that assurance, and if there's anything different I hear from Friday, I'm happy to update colleagues, but that is the timeframe we're working to.
Thank you, Neil. Councillor Webb.
Thank you, Chair. So in the report, it talks about the financial side, the money that's been put in over recent years into children's services. Could you give some examples of what that money's been spent on and how it's supporting that sort of improvement journey that we've been on?
Yes, so I think a lot of the money, £300,000, has gone on additional staffing to make sure that the teams are staffed, and the social workers are there to support timely assessments and timely care planning and decision making, and that's worked really well. So we have ongoing recruitment and a retention program. So some of the money is being used for retention. A lot of the money has been used to bring in additional around 18 social workers. We've done another recruitment campaign just recently where we have recruited both into our children in need team, which the inspectors really had a look at, and our safeguarding team. So by September, we will have 2 areas within children's where we will have no agency social workers. So children and team will be fully staffed with permanent workers, and so will the safeguarding team. And we will work with the other teams around supporting agency workers to become permanent. And I'm not necessarily saying that all agency working is bad. I think in York, for example, the agency workers that we've had are longer term. They aren't like in some areas where they've had agency workers that say 4 to 6 weeks. We've had that long term commitment from agency workers, but we would always like people to be committed to an organisation. And what we have brought in with some of the additional resources is a programme for agency social workers just to be made permanent, so they don't have to go through an interview process and wait for a vacancy to come along. We actually invited them to have permanent contracts with us, and that will really help going forward. Some of the things in the action plan around consistency, supervision and decision making with those teams, especially the children in need team, where you have lots of the decision making, the long-term support with children is really positive.
And sorry, just to reflect on a few areas in relation to that. So obviously, Jamela's touched on workforce there. So other areas, particularly around trying to introduce as much stability as we can into the workforce. We face challenges on that matter, as does every other local authority, and that's reflected in the Josh McAllister report as well. So there's a significant amount which is actually focused on that initial grow your own, the use of Frontline, our partnership with the University of York, about how do we secure that pipeline of future social workers, and then also how we retain social workers. So looking at the career progression route that exists for social workers in York. And then another aspect, which is a relative recent introduction, is looking at evaluation from other areas through the What Work Centre, which is around dedicated business support into those teams, which allows the social workers to spend more of their time doing what we want social workers to be doing, which is actually working directly with children and young people. So those are just a few other examples as well about where that investment has actually gone.
Thank you, Neil. I just can ask a question first, and I'll come to both of you. I was going to ask you, Jamela, about clearly the importance of consistency of quality of service is very much in the report to Ofsted. How will you ensure that quality is consistent throughout the service?
So we already have in place, so we have quality assurance in place through our head of service. So we have a senior leadership team where we have a discussion around the quality of plans and the quality of assessments that's already in place. We also have a audit, so we audit and case sample our assessments and our care plans, and we do that quite regularly. We also look to invite peers to come in and have a look at our assessments and see whether the practice is consistent and if there's anything we need to do differently. But equally through a DCS, so that's the regional DCS support, so Director of Children's Services support. We are part of their regional programme of inspection, so come in and have a look at how our children's services are running, equally sample some of our assessments and care plan, and through the ambition board we will also talk about, you know, how is the quality of service good, and if you have good quality service, you can almost see your decision making is would be quite effective. So through our performance metrics, we will be able to see timely decision making, timely visits and timely recording. So you've got your performance on one hand and your performance matrix through the ambition board, but equally with the case sampling, and that goes on every month to have a real look at what our cases are like. And like I said, we've just agreed our practice standards, and that's what we'll hold to account when we look at sampling ours through the quality assurance framework, whether they meet the practice standards as well. And if there are learnings, I think with Neil, we'll do workshops with our social workers and to make sure that we drive that home. So there are lots of elements of where we will make sure that we have that consistency of practice, and then have the scrutiny at scrutiny boards like yourself, like Councillor Fitzpatrick made a really good point of has required, and probably that was the wrong terminology there, because we would look at bringing a report here around how do we know that our practice is consistent, and that will be through our reviews.
Thank you very much. Councillor Orwell, I think next.
Thank you, Chair. It was good to hear your plans to getting young people involved in it. I think that's very important. And also that the work that's gone into retaining staff over the last year or two is now working. I know there's been a shortage of social workers across the region for some time, and the plans that we've had to grow our own and retain them once they've been trained by us. And it's good to see that those are coming to fruition. I wonder if you could help me a bit with the terminology for the Ofsted reports. They seem to have changed over time. Now we've got requires improvement to be good. I've seen other authorities that have requires improvement, and some authorities that have been taken over and the services put out to other organs. Is there a rationale for all of this new terminology?
Yes, I think because we've had a new framework in place, there are some areas that have gotten inadequate, and that's where the conversations of whether, you know, it depends on how unsafe the services are, whether they go into children's trust or whether they stay in the local authorities, and you have lots of those debates because they're inadequate, and most of them fall into inadequate because the inspectors do not feel that the services are safe and children are not safe. So we haven't got that here. Then you have requires improvement, where there's quite a lot of work to be done, and where they found issues in a majority of those three areas that I've raised. And then you have some areas like ourselves that require improvement to be good. So they recognise that we're on that journey to be good, but we're just not quite there yet. So what they're saying in all three areas, our action plan hopefully will take us to a place where we will provide those good services at a pace. So they've recognised that a lot of work has been done over the last 2 years. And moving at that pace will enable us to be good. Hence, we requires improvement to be good, and not more in either requires improvement or inadequate.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Joanna. Councillor Webb.
Thank you, Chair. There's a counter to that, Councillor Orrell, that if it's taken 2 years of good work to get us to requires improvement to be good, and we were good in 2016, then actually we were a lot worse a couple of years back. And again, I go back to thanking staff for the work that has gone in to get us to this action plan. A couple of questions really from me. Firstly, following on from the talking about growing our own social workers, we have had the frontline service that's been going on. How many social workers has that sort of generated? How many have we got now? It's probably straightforward once I'll stop there and then come back.
In terms of the overall number that's come through the programme, I don't have that to hand. We have 2 pods currently which run side by side, so they produce 5 social workers at a time. So what we expect is that in September, the 2 pods will in effect graduate. So that will mean that we will have 10 newly qualified social workers coming into the service, which will then address some of the agency issues that Jamila mentioned earlier. What we're expecting to do is to then move to only needing to have 1 pod going forward. Now that we've actually had that investment of having 2 pods for some time.
And is there any guarantee that those pods, those 10 people, will actually stay with us, or can they move on freely?
No, they can move on, and there will be some that have moved on, and I think that would be a helpful thing that we can bring back to the future scrutiny committee, is to give you that detail about the profile of how those pods have progressed, what the retention has been, and how they've moved on. But a key thing for us, as I've said, is about creating the right environment for good social work practice, and that is what will attract those social workers to remain within York, regardless of lucrative agency offers elsewhere. We want them to remain in York because actually the environment in York is the environment where they can deliver good quality social work practice.
Thank you. And then my other question, if you'll indulge me, on 17E, responses to children aged 16 and 17 who present as homeless. I mean, this is quite worrying. You know, if you're 16 years old presenting as homeless, and the service that should be sort of looking after you. If there's questions there, that is a worry. And I wonder if we could sort of explore that a little bit. What's that mean? What happens now? What was the issues then?
I think this area was mainly to do with our protocol. So we have a protocol in place, and when the inspectors came, the protocol had lapsed, and it was assuring the inspectors that we knew and all our staff knew about the homeless protocol that was in place and how that should be applied. We do have very low numbers of children aged 16 and 17 that are homeless, and I think it was at the time of the inspection where the protocol should have been updated, and it wasn't, and it had been out of date for a couple of months by the time we've come. However, we have rectified that, and now the protocol has been updated and shared with the teams. We take seriously supporting our children and young people, and I think Dennis from our housing came to the corporate parenting board around how can we support younger children and young people more earlier on in their journey around finding housing. We're in the process of setting up the housing panel to make sure that we have sight of all our care leavers and children leaving care, and that panel should be up and running by the end of July, so children have a voice in their provision. And we equally work really closely with housing around our homelessness and homeless protocol. But like I say, we have these low numbers, but even still, we needed to make sure that we have processes and protocols in place that is understood by all, and we now do have that.
Thank you, Joanna. Councillor Fitzpatrick.
Thank you. Just on that, Neil and I will remember the corporate parenting board before Dennis came along to the meeting, the previous one, where young people had expressed concern about the quality of the accommodation they had. Even though that might have gone back over a period of time, it was at that point I recognised just how important it is to actually listen to the young people, tell us what they feel, because they weren't happy at that point in time. So that's quite good. A couple of things I just want to mention. I'm equally very, very concerned about the homelessness of young people, and I think the link there, that, you know, the possible link with NEETs really is quite a concern. We're not saying that there is a link there, but there could be if we're not careful. And Jamila, just on that point, I recognise that you might not necessarily know the exact number, whether it be 1 or 2 or 3. But I mean, not many actually. 1 is too many, really, isn't it? In that context. And I would say that the Human Rights Board, of which I was a member when we met, we don't meet anymore. They did a very good scrutiny piece of work on NEETs in the city, and I don't know if you remember that, Neil. So there is evidence there that can be built upon, I think, that would be useful really, and it will bring in partners like the university, like the experts, so, you know, in terms of the basic human rights to a roof over your head, that sort of thing, that would be quite useful. So yeah, thank you.
And I think that the housing panel, which I mentioned, Councillor Fitzpatrick, will really help with that and bring partners together, and the voice of the young child being there. We do any young child that presents as homeless, we do support them quite, but it's about ensuring that our care leavers, and you're right, the right accommodation, making sure that they are supported in accessing the right accommodation at an earlier age is really key, and what type of accommodation that should be. So hopefully that panel will really be something quite useful, which we will pick up in the corporate parenting board. Thank you.
Coming at that point, I think the points that Councillor Fitzpatrick make are very astute, and the element of human rights and the United Nations right of the child, whether the government is minded or not to include that in legislation, the Minister and the Lords would not make a clear position on, but I think that would be a particular aspect of responsibility on local authorities, but would need central government funding to match that requirement, and also the protected characteristics whether that would be included. So I think there is elements of that which is live in terms of legislation review, but will require additional resources if they come from government to us.
Thank you. Councillor Heaton.
Thank you. Yeah, just a couple of very brief points. I think when we're looking at retention of social workers, one of the things we have to make sure we're looking at as well is keeping in mind that the internal operations of it aren't an island in themselves. We need to make sure that on a broader perspective, we are making the city an attractive place for people to stay in. A place where people can stay. I mean, it's been said previously about housing being an issue, why social workers aren't staying after graduation. So that's something we need to make sure is being looked at more broadly. The other thing, when we were talking about funding and investment, and just to raise this again, as this had slipped out of my mind, and it was only when I was reviewing my notes a couple of days ago. It was stated by the previous director that we're currently significantly, and we have historically been significantly under budgeting for children in care, and we should be looking to budget many more than we actually are. So I hope that's something that stays in place from other directions, just to keep that in people's mind as much as anything else at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Heaton. Any further questions? Councillor Webb.
Thank you, Chair. Final couple from me. I'm sure you're all glad to hear. 17F, the pace of planning for children in unregistered children's homes. Now, this is an issue that is of national importance. This is not just a York-based issue. But to be clear, that we have had children who've been in unregistered placements, and by that could mean any number of settings, some of which we would find wholly inappropriate for sort of children. And I wonder if you could just elaborate on what unregistered children homes mean, what they have meant for our children in York, and what we're going to do about that, or what's being done.
Thank you, Councillor Webb. So at the time of the inspection, there was one young person. We have had previously more than one young person. We had one young person, it was called, in an unregulated setting. And these are settings where children and young people are cared for, but they're not regulated by Ofsted. However, that doesn't mean that from a council point of view, we don't actually regulate the care that's going in. So we assure that the safeguarding are taking place, contracts are in place, and that the care is monitored. So from a council point of view, we do that. But from an Ofsted point of view, the placement is not regulated by them, hence why it's called an unregulated placement. I think in particular, you sometimes find children end up in unregulated placements because it's not for the lack of a local authority finding a placement. That particular young person, I think we looked at over 50 placements plus a national search out, and there were no placements identified at the time, hence the young person ended up in an unregulated setting. But when we say unregulated, I do want to point out that the care that was put in was not left to his own devices. We did contract manage it, and we made sure that the carers had the right training and skills in place to support the young person. I think there's some delays and the inspectors were sort of saying there's delays in moving people out of unregulated or unregistered placements into registered. And it can be quite difficult the older the child is, the number of challenging behaviours perceived by providers. can cause delays in finding the right placement, because providers can at the moment choose, you know, and then they have to have suitability. So if a provider's got more than 2 or 3 children, or more than one children in a particular setting, there's a child that we're trying to place, or the young person we're trying to place, actually a match. So there's lots of things and reasons why children end up in unregulated settings. But there are a number of reasons why we can't move children out in a timely way. And we have raised with our Ofsted colleagues around the difficulty in finding placement. So we have that regularly at the moment, where we have a number of children where we look for placements for, and there's national searches out, but it is a national issue. I know my other DCS colleagues are having the same conversations around how can we look at the right placement and the right providers. So from a council point of view, we are looking at bringing in our own sort of local provision. So we took a paper to our CMT and PHCMT, and part of our sufficiency strategy is about securing some more closer to home provision, whilst we work through with our national providers and other regional providers of what more can we do for children, especially between the ages of 14 and 19, getting the appropriate provision in a timely way.
Thank you for that. And yeah, as I say, I know that's not just a York-based problem, that's part of the whole national issue around children's services, and thank you for that answer. My final question from me is paragraph 20 talks about sort of interim visits. So 2 focus visits from Ofsted, or 1 focus visit and 1 joint targeted area inspection, a JTI. So for me, it's what do you expect would be the focus of those visits? That might be a stab in the dark, but who knows? And then Councillor Waller, for you, what is your top priority over the next couple of months? What is it that you want to see change between now and, say, September?
So shall I answer the first bit, and then let Councillor Waller come in for the second? So inspections work in 2 ways. What they are looking for is the action plan and the pace of which we've actually made some of the changes and progress in that. They will be really concentrating on what we've said, have we done it, coming back to the chair's question about the dates that we've put in, are they achievable, have we achieved them, and what are the impact that has had for our children and young people. So they will speak to children and young people and say, in a focus visit, how does that feel? Does it feel that the things have improved and changed? Because that's what they will concentrate on, the action plan, and then the impact the changes have had on children and young people. A JTI is much more of a partnership. So we had a JTI in 2019. We might have another one soon, because it's how they stagger them. So we may have a JTI before a focus visit, or vice versa. And a JTI looks at much more around what have we done as partners. So our police partners, our housing colleagues, our health colleagues, how have we worked from the JTI in 2019 and improved up until now. So they might do a much more of an in-depth inspection of how we've improved since the last JTI in 2019, alongside the action plan that we've done for the ILAC. So that's a bit more of a substantial inspection. But they may choose to do more than one focus visit, depends on what their concerns are. But generally, they usually do 1 twice a year, just to make sure that we have made sufficient progress.
Thank you, Jemima.
There was a question to me, which I'm sure you wouldn't wish to deny, Councillor
I'm
Webb.
certainly not, Councillor Warren,
Right.
no.
Well, clearly, the priority over the next couple of months is to ensure these deadlines are met, but at the same time, to follow through the theme of the voice of young people. So there will be plenty of opportunities to demonstrate that, and I look forward to the changed format of corporate parenting on in September. And I think it's looking at this in terms of how do we see the quality coming through to demonstrate the consistency so that that is reported at meetings like this to executive, and that is visible to councillors as well as the public in a public meeting. And also checking our partnership working, because the officers are very much focused on delivering this, but they don't control it all. And therefore it's those interfaces with different bits of the council, as well as external partners, that I shall also be looking at, and ensuring that where there needs to be the appropriate letters that they're sent.
Thank you, Councillor Waller. Now, Councillor Fitzpatrick. You're very welcome. Please continue.
I would say, I suppose I am, an Ofsted inspector, but for education, for schools, and it's very different. So when we talk about regional peer reviews, I know that's the norm, but sometimes statistical peer reviews, are more sort of appropriate in lots of ways. I mean, if you're only ever asking your friends to review you all the time, I would say, for example, something to consider. Sad person that I am, I do spend quite a lot of time reading the LGA briefings we get all the time. And local authorities love to tell you when they've done things well and what they're doing. And for example, Camden in London's just recently had an outstanding, as we know North Yorkshire has, but I mean, it's just worth, reading other examples of what other places are doing, because there might be some things in there that we could, rather than reinvent the wheel or whatever else, things like that are always useful. So, and I would just like to finish by saying to Neil in particular, thank you for all the work that you put in and the work you continually put in on an operational level, really, in terms of corporate parenting in particular, and to echo what Councillor Webb has said about staff in general. I mean, they are working very hard. It's very challenging times, and I absolutely agree with Councillor Heaton. It's never difficult to attract social workers to York, particularly coming from York University. They all want to stay in York. It's retaining people and retaining staff. And that's the key thing that we really need to work on. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Neil has indicated to me he has to leave the meeting by 6:30. So if anyone has a question they'd like to direct to Neil, now is the time to indicate for me, please. No, in that case, you're very welcome to go, Neil, and get on with your next commitment.
Right, thank you very much. I do appreciate it, colleagues, and I look forward to working with all of you to get this right with the young people in York. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions from colleagues? Just one, Councillor Webb.
Is it worth just outlining, Chair, how we as a committee are going to review this, how we're going to keep an eye on it over time? I know we briefly mentioned this in a forum last week, but that's not a public meeting, so yes. I wonder if you just want to outline that.
We have a further meeting to finalise the top priorities for the committee. We should be somewhere, I think, the week commencing 25th July. But it's certainly our intention to keep a close eye on the Ofsted progress, as we had done before. But I think now with renewed focus, that it's obviously very, very important for the city and the children of our city in particular. So we will have regular updates, be asking officers for regular updates, along with the budget figures to go with them, to make sure that things are on track, and we're asking the questions that Jamela and the colleagues would expect to make sure that is the case. Thank you. Right, if that's finishing the topic, so the questions for that topic, I don't have any urgent business. Does anyone else around the table want to raise any urgent business? In that case, I shall close the meeting at 6:25, and thank you all very much for attending and your inputs, particularly from Councillor Waller and Jamela. Thank you.